You're listening to The Pipeline, the Western Standards National Affairs program, recording this Wednesday, February 12th, 2020. Each week we break down the issues, discuss them in depth, and examine some of the broader implications for Western Canada and beyond. Featuring this week from Calgary, the Western Standards publisher, Derek Fildebrandt. Derek, how are you in Calgary today?
I'm excellent.
Awesome. And featuring also Dave Naylor normally from Calgary, but today from dreary Abbotsford, British Columbia. How are things there, Dave?
Well, I'm hoping the sun shines at some point this month, but it's not looking hopeful right now, Paul.
All right. And Dave, of course.
Are we obliged to open every episode of The Pipeline with a weather report?
Yes, we are. This is our news and weather wrap. Dave, of course, is our news editor, and your host today is myself, digital editor Paul Holmes, from lovely and also a little wet and dreary Victoria, British Columbia. So today, before we get started, just a reminder, if you're not already a member of Western Standard, please go to westernstandardonline.com, click on the membership button, and sign up today. This is how we continue to bring you incredible breaking news, commentary, and weather reporting here at the Western Standard.
We'll give you our opinion on the weather.
Absolutely. So today, you can see right behind me is a copy of U2's War Record, one of my favorites, a classic. And we're talking about kind of war-y things happening in Canada. There's blockades going on. There's the Teck situation, and lots of people understandably frustrated and angry about that. So we're just going to focus on those two topics today. And just to kick us off, I'm going to move over to Dave. And Dave, why don't you give us an update on the latest with these blockades happening all over the country? What's driving this?
Paul, it's hard to know where to begin, but let me take a deep breath and recap what we've got so far. On Thursday, the RCMP moved into a native blockade up near Smithers in northern BC that was against the building of the CoastalGasLink pipeline. Since then, we've had rail blockades, we've had building blockades, we've had road blockades, and every day it seems to be spreading more and more. We've seen video of people being arrested. Not protesters, mind you. These are average citizens who just need to get to work, and they've been arrested for trying to take down the barriers to get themselves to work, as the RCMP stand by and watch. In Calgary, they shut down the aptly mentioned or aptly named Reconciliation Bridge as the police watched. As you know, in Victoria, it was mob scene on Tuesday when hundreds of protesters wouldn't let anybody into the building. Some female staffers were spit on. I know one received a bloody nose by these protesters, many of whom seem to be wearing masks to protect their identity. But don't worry, it looks like our federal government is on it. In what is his third straight month in Africa, Justin Trudeau today held a press conference, said he was very concerned. Transportation Minister Marc Garneau said he's also concerned, which is probably good news for companies like CN, who have said they may have to cut large swaths of their tracks down. And they're saying Canada's international image is being tarnished because we're no longer reliable suppliers. Via rail, tens of thousands of trips have now been canceled in their high passenger corridors down in central Canada. So seems like the protests are spreading, and nobody's really doing anything about it at the moment.
Well, and unlike some protests where the objective is to get ordinary people on side and raise awareness, that doesn't seem to be the objectives here whatsoever. The objectives seem to be to create a bit of chaos, and on that measure, I suppose you could say that they've been successful. Derek, what's your take?
I think you're right, Paul. They've failed to get majority sympathy on side, even in British Columbia, which is, got a reputation as a bit of lotus land and being very environmentally conscious. They still haven't got people on board to oppose the CoastalGasLink pipeline. They haven't gotten a majority on side to oppose Trans Mountain or any of these things. And so they've lost the battle of public opinion some time ago. Then they tried tying things up litigiously in the courts. They've lost every single one of those major battles. And now they've just gone to outright illegality and are betting on the goodwill and restraint of the authorities to not do anything about it. And we've gotten to this point now where blockades can go up around Victoria, and the people putting them up are ignored by police and protected by police, and regular people just trying to get to work who remove illegal barricades, they are arrested. Or the man who defied the authority of these thugs and drove his truck around the barricade. The police are looking for that man, maybe to give him some kind of traffic act ticket. I'm not sure what it is that he has done wrong, other than driving through the median of a highway to get around an illegal blockade. And so our authorities have got the priorities of law enforcement ass backwards here. They're arresting the people who are either removing blockades or going around blockades, as if these blockades have any kind of legitimacy, and leaving this alone. And it's making a mockery of the rule of law in this country. And it's showing that, I think, that, look, pipeline approval, federal. The RCMP are federal. Teck approval, federal. All of these things are federal issues. Everything under the sun that Justin Trudeau wants to control, he claims is federal. But now Marc Garneau and Justin Trudeau say that this is a provincial matter. It is not a provincial matter. This is under the RCMP, a federal police force, and they have an obligation to take action here, and they're not doing it. I think this adds one of the many reasons why provinces like Alberta and British Columbia should get out of the RCMP and have their own police forces to do it themselves. That being said, I'm not convinced the British Columbia government would do anything about it. They're reaping the whirlwind of seeds that they've helped to sow. So when you had blockades now of the the British Columbia legislature in Victoria, there was a video that went out. I think it was the BC NDP's agriculture minister being blocked very forcefully from entering the BC legislature. Now, blocking elected officials from entering legislatures is something old kings of England would do, or despots in tin pot dictatorships in Africa. Not something you would typically see, but we now see in Canada. And what do our police and our politicians do? They shrug and they walk the other way and let this play out until they get tired.
It's interesting, too. You talked about the NDP being blocked from the legislature as well, because, of course, they're in power here in the province of British Columbia. But this happened to the Green MLAs as well, one of whom, Adam Olsen, somebody I know, who is a First Nations leader himself. And so there's a definite disconnect. These are the mob that has formed is, I think, more of an anti-establishment mob. It's just looking for a cause. Notably, when I was watching a video of the coverage in Victoria, a family member who I won't name came up behind me and said, "Is that Portland?" So it's
well, in the BC case, it just occurred to me that there's a really interesting opportunity here, because these I won't even call them native protesters or Wet'suwet'en, because these are a minority who the vast almost all of the elected bound councils along the affected routes are in support of all these pipelines and projects. These are hereditary chiefs who we should pay no attention to. They have no democratic legitimacy. They speak for themselves and themselves only. But the media like to amplify their voices if they stand for something else. But
it's an interesting story. I mean, you amplify an interesting story.
Yeah, but they're blockading both the NDP. If the BC NDP is not radical enough for you, you got the Greens, and they're blockading everyone from getting in the BC legislature. I think this is a unique opportunity for the BC Liberal opposition to break that blockade, get in there and call a quick non-confidence vote before any Greens or NDP MLAs can get in there. Get an election in BC. Please do it right now and have a quick non-confidence vote before they can get in there.
If only we could remember the name of the BC Liberal leader, so we remember who to vote for.
I have no idea who it is. You're in BC and you don't even know.
Andrew Wilkinson is his name, but I often forget.
Guys, what to remember is that this is not all fun and games. Sure, it might be a good laugh. Hey, let's take the afternoon off school and let's go down and blockade somebody. But it has turned a bit sinister. The Prince George Citizen reporting today that a bridge in the area near where the main Indigenous camp was sabotaged. Somebody went in and cut through the supports of the bridge, that if any truck had gone over it or an RCMP vehicle, the bridge would have collapsed. And, who knows what would have happened. But, it only takes somebody to lose control behind a wheel of a truck that's going through the barrier, and then you've got injured people. So,
although that action is crossing the line from thuggery to potential outright eco-terrorism, and I've been cautious against using the term eco-terrorist yet. I think that is a different threshold that we have not yet seen. These blockades are thugs. They're it's political violence of a sort. Using force to get your way, not the rule of law. But this bridge incident is, I think, crossing that line, getting dangerously close to eco-terrorism. But the police and the politicians have been utterly unwilling to intervene. We've seen this before. We saw it in Caledonia, where the police refused to intervene when one native band started occupying people's private homes, claiming that they belonged to them. I think we should perform an experiment. We could do it right here in Calgary. I think we should erect an equalization blockade along the Trans-Canada and see how long it takes the authorities to remove us.
Reading an interesting piece today, guys, in the National Post column by Chris Stelly. He brings up the example of what would happen in England if protesters blockaded the rail line between London and Manchester. The police would be there within seconds. And they would be removed because it's in the national interest. And surely via train service in the central Canada territory between Ontario, Quebec, Ottawa, people rely on that service, and they're not getting it at the moment because there's a small blockade near Brockville.
So you take stock of where we are now. You've got Horgan as Derek pointed out, has reaped what he's sowed with other pipelines. We've got this radicalized group. They're not going to take yes for an answer. It doesn't matter how many times Horgan invites them back to the table. They're looking to stop this. That group is not going to compromise on any of this, and they're creating a bunch of chaos. I think it's terrible for reconciliation efforts too, because ordinary people are getting angry, and they're taking out their anger on First Nations in some cases. And I don't think that this group is representative of all First Nations, and so that's a problem, I think, in the context of Canadian unity as well. So where do we go from here? Is this just going to continue to escalate until we see this kind of violent police crackdown, or is there some way out? I can't see it.
What I would like to see, and I don't think it would ever happen, is all the other First Nations that signed on to the CoastalGasLink pipeline. Everybody did. Everybody did. Have those bands, those leaders of those councils, go and talk to these hereditary chiefs and say, what you are doing is hurting our future. We're getting money out of this that is going to go to our people, and what you're doing is preventing that. I would like to see that happen. Not sure it will.
Yeah, I think it's an outstanding idea, because then you've got First Nations talking to First Nations, and they're not, there's no feeling that something is being imposed by outside.
I'm not even sure First Nations talking to First Nations works here, though. I mean, the elected band councils here have signed very, very lucrative agreements in some cases with these energy companies and pipeline companies. They agree. The majority of First Nations people agree. But the radical eco-left likes to use First Nations as a mascot. It's almost a mascot to them. That they'll put a couple of token First Nations out there, and what does the media report? Well, First Nations are opposed to this. Well, no, a few people are. That's like if you could find half a dozen Calgarians who love Justin Trudeau. Well, that doesn't mean we support Justin Trudeau. And
can you though? Can you find a half a dozen people?
I could find half a dozen people.
Okay, just
they don't
checking.
live anywhere near me. But these voices are being amplified artificially, being called indigenous. Really, we're not sure what to call them. I don't even think we can call them Wet'suwet'en protesters, because most of the Wet'suwet'en Band Council supports these projects. It's some hereditary chiefs. And can you imagine if Queen Elizabeth came out tomorrow with some political opinion on an issue of the day? She's smart enough not to, because she knows the role of a hereditary leader. It's to be symbolic and to cut some ribbons and to be a force of stability behind the scenes. It's not to get involved in the politics of the day. But these chiefs see themselves very differently. They see themselves, these hereditary chiefs, as being the rightful spokesman for their communities, and the media are taking them up on it.
And I would push back a little bit on that, Derek, and say within the context of the monarchy, and the Queen comparison is a good one. The Queen is ultimately the defender for Canada, right? If all else fails, that's the defense. And I think some of these hereditary chiefs see themselves as being the defenders where everything else has failed.
I would actually take Queen Elizabeth running our affairs over Justin Trudeau, but it would not be appropriate, regardless of how I feel the merits of her running things over Trudeau would be.
Which is an excellent segue. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, before we segue, though, I do have a question for Dave. Was zoomed in on you. I've noticed a little bobblehead in the cabinet behind you. I can't see because it's inside the cabinet, but it almost looks like a bobblehead of Ezra Levant. Could you tell our audience what your bobblehead is? Because I don't know.
Well, you know what? I'm currently at my mom's place in beautiful, dreary Abbotsford, and she is a big Ezra Levant fan.
That is an Ezra Levant bobblehead?
That is an Ezra Levant bobblehead over my shoulder.
I had no idea that was even a thing. That's amazing. All right.
Show us.
This is why you have to watch us on YouTube or Facebook if you're listening on the podcast stream.
Oh.
Dave Naylor now presenting Ezra Levant, our special guest today.
Special guest.
When Ezra used to be on
hold it more to the center.
On News Network, he was sort of based in Calgary, and he was out of our building, and he was going around with these one day, and I said, you know what, I'm going to get that for my mother for Christmas, and it's been on the dinner table every Christmas since then. So
Ezra eats dinner with you at Christmas. This is a side of you I did not know, Dave.
No, my mother, not me, my mother.
Well,
okay.
Apples and trees and something like that.
All right.
Back on point though. All these other indigenous groups that support the pipeline, they have hereditary chiefs too, right? But you're not hearing any opposition from them. Just this one small group that 28% of the pipeline is going through, and you've got half a dozen hereditary chiefs there who are against it.
And their allies. Speaking of allies, the federal government, a big ally to the province of Alberta. Dave, why don't you break down the very latest in the Teck saga?
The Teck saga, giant proposed multi-billion-dollar oil sands mine in northern Alberta, 100 kilometers north of Fort McMurray, being approved and is just waiting for federal cabinet approval, which they've vowed to come before the end of February. Take that for what it's worth. But now it just seems to have evolved into a bit of a stare down. Jason Kenney, Premier of Alberta, sent a letter to Trudeau saying it will be a disaster if it's not approved. Trudeau cabinet ministers coming out and saying, well, you better start towing the climate change line if you want us to approve it. And then another lug in the problem this week was a band that has already signed on, a band that has already approved it, has now stepped forward and say, whoa. There might be some things that we might want to take another look at. So, it's going around in circles like every other pipeline seems to be at the moment.
Derek, are we just in a state in Canada where we just can't build any more pipelines?
No, I genuinely believe
projects.
TMX is going to be the very last pipeline that gets built in the foreseeable future, unless something radical changes. It's not just Bill C-69 and C-48. And it's not just that these projects can get it tied up endlessly in the courts. It's now that the federal government's proven that it'll only use very, very tepid force in enforcing the law around these things. So, every little group around has the right to infinite appeals in the courts. And even if they lose that, the government's proven that it's only going to take a very tepid response in enforcing these court orders. So I really don't think we're going to see a major interprovincial or international pipeline built in Canada anytime soon beyond this. Teck obviously didn't get the memo. They didn't get the memo that you're not supposed to do big infrastructure energy projects in Canada anymore. This project's been ongoing for a very long time. They've met every regulatory and legislative hurdle that they had to meet. It's been approved by the non-political regulators. It's now purely in political hands, and it's being used as a political football. A business like this should not be used for political ends between two levels of government kind of measuring each other up. We've got the federal government's said implied extremely strongly that Alberta needs to drop its opposition to the carbon tax in the courts if it wants this going forward. That's funny for a few reasons. Alberta still has a carbon tax, much as people might not like to admit it, especially the UCP. We still have 2/3 of the NDP's carbon tax in place. We still have most of the anti-carbon regulation and legislation that the NDP put in place under this so-called tier program. It's not a radical departure from what the NDP had in place. But even if it was a radical departure, I'm not sure why Ottawa believes its business to approve a project, an industrial project within Alberta's borders that doesn't have any cross-border implications whatsoever. And it's almost cliche to say that this would never happen if it was in Quebec, but that's important to remember. And this needs to really be a line in the sand for Alberta. I mean, we constantly allow Ottawa to get away with things, and we yell at them. And we really have to make clear that yelling is not going to be the consequence this time. The province, and I think the Premier, very genuinely want this project to go forward. I'm not going to join those who think that they've joined the eco-radicals in this. I don't think that's a fair criticism. But I think the province, as much as it wants this to go forward, is afraid that this will escalate, that if Ottawa kills this project or unofficially kills it by regulatory delay, that this is going to really, really get out of hand. And that's why Ottawa's been preparing this bailout economic aid package. And it would be absolute capitulation for Alberta to accept a penny of it. For us to allow Ottawa to stab Alberta's industry in the heart and then hand us a Band-Aid in exchange for us saying thank you. So this is putting the Premier in a very tough spot. He wants this done, but I think he understands that if it's not done, he doesn't want anger at Ottawa to boil out of control from just anger at Trudeau, but to anger at Ottawa's institutions themselves. And adding into the mix was Drew Barnes, UCP MLA. He's really the last old school wild roser left in the Alberta legislature. He was elected first in 2012. He's one of the very few who didn't cross the floor to the PCs. And then in the kind of purge of much of the wild rose elements after the merger with the PCs, he was one of the only kind of old school wild rosers left standing. And he came out and said that he called on, and he sits on the province's Fair Deal panel, and he called on the Premier very publicly in a statement and an interview with the Western Standard, saying that the Premier should reject up every penny from Ottawa. We should not accept anything from this so-called bailout package to pacify us. And he further said, implying very strongly that he might agree with this, that if Ottawa kills the Teck mine, that Albertans there's going to be a huge surge in support for independence. And the implication being there that Ottawa better get this done, or there might be, and I say might be, at least some people in Alberta willing to finally draw a line in the sand and make this more than positioning for bailout, economic aid packages, or simply yelling at Ottawa because it feels good.
How many more Teck projects are in the, sorry, bad pun, pipeline waiting to happen, or is this the last big one?
Well, there's actually a provincial one that's being held up. There's another project that doesn't require federal approval, but requires provincial approval. I can't name it off the top of my head, but they were coming out attacking the provincial government just a few days ago, accusing them of hypocrisy because they've been on regulatory hold for a very long time. They say themselves, we haven't independently verified, but they say themselves that they've met all the regulatory hurdles. They're waiting on the political yes from the province, and they haven't got it. I'm not sure I'm not aware of any other major kind of mega projects that are in the pipeline, so to speak, right now. And frankly, I'm surprised there was even Teck in the pipeline because the memo went out a few years ago that you're not supposed to even try anymore.
Well, and isn't that kind of the point, right? I mean, these large mega projects are so passé in an international, world of 2020. You almost think for the federal government, they should just say, you know what, let's just do this because next one's not going to be funded by investors anyway. So this will be the last one, right? I don't know. What do you think, Dave?
Well, keep in mind, Teck has been in the pipeline, so to speak, for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And they've spent billions of dollars just to get to this stage. So I think Derek's 100% right. This will probably be the last one we see. We're now getting arguments for people saying don't approve it. They're saying, well, it's not going to be economically feasible. Mm. Well, I'm sorry, but it's not none of your business, but B, the Teck people obviously think that it will be, or else they wouldn't have spent billions and billions of dollars to get it to this stage. So, yeah, I think this will be the last one we see, certainly in a long, long time.
So for the independence movement in Alberta, Derek, if this does get approved, you think that'll quell a lot of the anger that's fueling that? Use another pun.
Because if it gets approved, it'll be seen as approved because Ottawa had no choice to, not because they have the best interests of Alberta at heart. But if it's not approved, I think it will add a very healthy dose of or hefty dose of fuel to the independence fire. I think if you're sitting around plotting independence right now, you want Ottawa to say no to this. Mm-hmm. and send some insulting aid package in its place. But I think approving it doesn't kill it, but not approving it will add huge fire to it. And it would, in Drew Barnes's own words, it would show there is no such thing as a fair deal with Ottawa. There is no fair deal to be had. And then you really need to have an honest conversation with ourselves about, are we willing to just accept the status quo that our lot in Canada is this, and this is how we're going to be treated, and that's just that? Or do we have to do something else?
Well, and if there is an energy industry future in Alberta, it's not within Canada, right? I mean, that's what we're looking at.
I think that's already pretty clear, but I think this would make it all the more clear. I mean, it would be an undeniable fact that Alberta's energy industry is set to die on this. And to that, Jason Kenney had a huge change of tone in a conference he did in Washington, D.C., and in an interview with Don Braid, Calgary Herald columnist, where he used very different language, not as strident on phasing out the oil sands as, say, Justin Trudeau or, God forbid, Jagmeet Singh, but using language that this is temporary, it's going to go away, much more moderate, saying that last barrel of oil that we produce in the world should be done in a place like Alberta, but pretty much saying that, we're going to transition away from this towards the so-called renewable green economy. Very different language than we've seen before. I think he's under a lot of pressure to walk that back because that angers a lot of people here. But he is trying very hard to change his tone, if not his substance, in dealing with Ottawa and environmental groups, almost to earn some kind of social license, if not from the radicals, which I think he's smart enough to know is not possible, at least from the senior politicians in Ottawa, which hold the power.
Dave, in the last few minutes here, news this morning that Christy Blatchford, an absolute giant in journalism in Canada, has passed away, age 68. You knew her, or you met her. Your thoughts?
Yeah, she's worked for all the big papers in Canada, Paul, and I dealt with her at arm's length for a lot of it, but got to meet her up close and personal at the 1988 Calgary Olympics. And the last night of the Olympics, all the media got together and we blew off some steam because we'd all worked 2 months straight. And she was the last man, so to speak, standing. She outlasted us all. And when we were all falling asleep on bus benches the next morning to catch a ride to Juan Antonio's press conference, she was still holding court. And sad day. And you said it, an absolute giant of Canadian journalism.
Well, our regards go out to her family, and we will wrap the episode on that note. Thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment. You can find us on the website, westernstandardonline.com. You can find us on the Facebook page. You can find us on YouTube, and you can find us on your favorite podcast app. From Calgary, our publisher, Derek Fildebrandt.
Goodbye.
And from Abbotsford today, Dave Naylor, our news editor.
Well, you've heard of Elf on the Shelf. I've now got Ezra on the shelf. We'll be hoping for some less dreary weather next week, Paul. Good to be with you.
I thought my prop, was gonna be the big talking point today, but you absolutely crushed me on that one. Paul Holmes from Victoria, British Columbia, the digital editor. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see everybody next week.